The Galactic Concordance had ruled the stars for over 300 years. Its fleets patrolled every major trade lane. Its laws were enforced by ironclad dreadnoughts, and its scientists claimed no species could match their mastery of energy, matter, and space. To them, the outer rim of the galaxy was quiet, mostly empty and certainly not worth serious attention. That was why the alert from Deep Scan Outpost Theta 9 came as a mild curiosity rather than a threat. A single vessel had emerged from the Sol system, a star humans called home. The ship was small by Concordant standards, barely the size of a light patrol frigate. Its hull was oddly smooth, with no visible weapon ports or engine vents. It moved slowly, almost lazily, as if its crew had no idea they were being watched by the most powerful empire in known space. On the bridge of the Concordance heavy cruiser, Iron Resolve, Admiral Vex Torin sipped his morning nutrient broth and listened to the report. He was a tall, broad-shouldered Zenthar with silver-streaked scales and eyes that had seen 100 battles. He did not believe in surprises. Everything in the galaxy followed logic, hierarchy, and order. This little ship from Sol was probably a lost trader or a scientific probe gone off course. Still, protocol demanded verification. Dispatch the Swift Dagger and Razor Wing, he ordered. Intercept and scan. If it's unarmed, escort it to Helios processing. If it resists, disable it. 2 sleek destroyer-class ships peeled away from the fleet and accelerated toward the unknown vessel. Their commanders hailed it in Galactic Standard, the universal language of diplomacy and command. There was no reply. Then, after a long silence, a voice crackled over the comms, human, male, calm, and speaking with a slight accent the Concordance translators struggled to place. This is Captain Derek Lang of the Terran cruiser Odyssey. We're on a routine patrol. Please state your intentions. The Concordance officers exchanged glances. Humans. They'd heard rumors. Primitive bipeds from a backwater system. Barely spacefaring. Still using chemical rockets less than a century ago. This had to be a mistake. No human ship should be this far out, let alone operating with such confidence. Identify your registry code and submit to inspection, came the sharp reply from Commander Krell of the Swift Dagger. We don't have a registry with your empire, Lang said. We're not part of your jurisdiction. We mean no harm. That was the wrong thing to say. In the Concordance, neutrality was weakness. Refusal to comply was defiance. Krell signaled his weapons officer. Prepare ion lances. Target their engines. Non-lethal strike. The twin destroyers powered up their forward arrays. Blue energy gathered at the tips of their primary cannons. On the Odyssey, alarms blared softly. Derek Lang, a lean man in his late 30s with tired eyes and steady hands, didn't flinch. He tapped a button on his console. Activate Phase 7 shielding. Full dispersion. A faint shimmer rippled across the Odyssey's hull, so subtle that the Concordance sensors barely registered it. Then the ion lances fired. Twin beams of crackling energy slammed into the human ship and vanished. Not deflected. Not absorbed. Simply gone as if they'd never existed. Krell stared at his display in disbelief. Impossible. Recharge and fire again. This time they used plasma torpedoes. The glowing projectiles streaked toward the Odyssey, spinning with lethal heat. But halfway there, they flickered and dissolved into harmless light. The human ship didn't move. It just floated there, silent and unharmed. Admiral Toran, watching from the Iron Resolve, leaned forward. What kind of shielding is that? No one on his bridge had an answer. Concordant science said shields either absorbed or redirected energy. Nothing could make a weapon disappear entirely. Yet here it was, happening in real time. Frustrated, Krell ordered boarding drones launched. Small armored pods designed to latch onto enemy hulls and cut through with molecular drills. 6 of them shot out from the destroyers, homing in on the Odyssey's aft section. But as they neared, each drone sparked violently and went dark, tumbling lifelessly through space. Lang's voice returned over the comms, still calm. We've shown restraint. Please stand down. We don't want trouble. But to the Concordance, restraint looked like arrogance. Toran's pride burned. He couldn't let a primitive species make his fleet look foolish. He gave the order. All ships weapons free. Disable that vessel by any means. The Iron Resolve and its 2 destroyer escorts opened fire. Railgun slugs, plasma bursts, gravitic pulses. Everything the Concordance arsenal offered. The sky around the Odyssey lit up with explosions and energy trails. Yet the human ship remained untouched. Its shield didn't glow or strain. It simply existed untouched by the storm. Then, without warning, the Odyssey's engines flared, not with the bright blue thrust of concordance drives, but with a soft violet pulse that bent the starlight around it. In less than a second, the ship vanished, not into warp, not into hyperspace, but into something the concordance sensors couldn't track. One moment it was there, the next empty space. Silence fell over the fleet. Torrens' knuckles whitened around his command chair. He had seen many strange things in his long career. Ancient ruins, rogue AIs, even ghost fleets from dead civilizations. But this was different. The humans hadn't just defended themselves. They'd made the Concordance's greatest weapons look like toys. Back on Earth, Derek Lang reappeared in lunar orbit. The Odyssey's micro-warp drive had drained half its power core, but it had worked perfectly. He keyed the secure channel to United Terran Defense Command. Mission complete. First contact went as expected. They fired first. We held the line. On the other end, Commander Lisa Grant exhaled slowly. Good job, Derek. Get back to dry dock. And stay quiet. The galaxy just noticed us. Now we have to decide what kind of neighbors we want to be. Lang looked out the viewport at the pale blue dot of Earth. He knew the Concordance wouldn't forget this. They'd come back with more ships, more questions, maybe even war. But humanity had spent decades preparing for this moment. They weren't explorers or traders anymore. They were something new, something the galaxy hadn't seen in 1,000 years, and they were ready. After the encounter near the edge of known space, the Galactic Concordance did not sleep. Their high command held emergency sessions deep within the obsidian towers of the capital world, Virelli's Prime. Holograms of the Odyssey played on loop its strange shield, its silent evasion, its impossible disappearance. Scientists argued, admirals shouted, and the Emperor himself demanded answers. How could a species that had barely left its home system less than a century ago build a warship that laughed at Concordance firepower? Meanwhile, on Earth, life went on, but not as before. The United Terran Defense Command activated Protocol Horizon, a long-dormant plan for full-scale readiness. Underground shipyards beneath the Rockies and the Himalayas hummed with activity. Factories that once built solar harvesters now forged quantum capacitors and nanoweave hull plating. And at the heart of it all was Commander Lisa Grant, a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and a mind that never stopped working. She stood in the central chamber of Lunar Base Theta, watching engineers run diagnostics on a new dreadnought still under construction. Its name would be Ares Prime, but for now it was just Hull 7. Around her, screens showed data from the Odyssey's recent mission. Shield resonance patterns, energy absorption rates, micro-warp stability. Everything confirmed what they'd hoped. Their secret project wasn't just theory. It worked. The truth was, humanity hadn't built these ships from scratch. Decades ago, in 2147, a small alien vessel had crashed in the frozen wastes of Siberia. It wasn't Concordance, it was older, stranger, possibly from a civilization long gone. The wreckage held technology that defied human physics. Self-repairing metal, energy fields that bent causality, navigation systems that used starlight as a map. For years, scientists studied it in silence. They didn't tell the world. They didn't even tell most of their own governments. They waited, learned, and slowly, carefully began to copy what they could. But humans didn't just copy. They improved. Where the alien tech was rigid and precise, human engineers added flexibility. They linked shield harmonics to real-time threat analysis. They taught hulls to heal by redirecting nanites from non-critical zones. They made ships that didn't just survive battle, they adapted during it. Back in Concordance space, panic turned to obsession. Intelligence teams scoured every database for information on Sol, Earth, and humans. They found old trade logs from fringe merchants who'd visited the system decades ago. They saw images of cities, farms, and primitive aircraft. Nothing suggested advanced weaponry. Nothing explained the Odyssey. The more they learned, the less they understood. Then came the second incident. Near Proxima Centauri, a Concordance supply convoy was rerouted to test a new patrol route. 2 heavy cruisers and 4 escort frigates moved in formation through the quiet star system. Suddenly, sensors pinged, an unregistered vessel dropping out of micro-warp right behind an ice moon. It was smaller than the Odyssey, sleeker, painted matte black with no markings. This was the Vanguard, a new Terran frigate on its first live mission. At the helm was Lieutenant Kyle Brooks, a quiet man from Oregon who'd flown drones before he could drive a car. He wasn't here to fight. He was testing stealth protocols and long-range sensor masking. But when the Concordance ships powered up weapons and demanded surrender, Brooks knew talk wouldn't work. Instead of running, he did something unexpected. He flew toward them, low, fast, and using the gravity well of Proxima b to slingshot around the planet. The Concordance targeting systems lost lock. Their predictive algorithms failed because Brooks wasn't flying like a soldier. He was flying like a surfer riding a wave, using every bump in space-time like a ramp. Then he fired, not with beams or missiles, but with railgun slugs made of compressed tungsten infused with resonant frequencies. The first shot punched through the lead cruiser's main shield, not by overpowering it, but by vibrating at the exact frequency that made the shield flicker for a microsecond. The slug passed through like a ghost and struck the engine housing. The cruiser went dark. The second shot took out the comms array of the second ship. In less than 90 seconds, Kyle Brooks had disabled 2 capital ships without taking a single hit. Then, just like Lang, he vanished into a micro-warp jump so tight it left no energy trail. The Concordance fleet spent hours searching. They found nothing but drifting debris and confused officers. When the report reached Admiral Torin, he didn't yell. He sat in silence for a full minute. Then he said, "They're not just building one ship. They're building a fleet." On Earth, Kyle landed the Vanguard in a hidden hangar beneath Mount Rainier. Engineers swarmed the ship, downloading flight data and checking hull stress. Commander Grant met him on the tarmac. "You took a big risk," she said. "They were going to scan the system," Kyle replied. "If they found our listening post near Proxima, they'd know we've been watching them for years." Grant nodded. That was the real game now. It wasn't just about defense. It was about control of information. The Concordance thought they were the only power in the galaxy. Humanity needed them to stay confused just a little longer. In the weeks that followed, more human ships began appearing at the edges of Concordance space, not attacking, just observing. A scout near Vega, a sensor buoy near Sirius. Each time, Concordance patrols scrambled only to find empty space or a brief ghostly signal that vanished before they could trace it. Morale in the fleet began to drop. Rumors spread that humans used witchcraft or time tricks. Veterans scoffed, but even they checked their scanners twice. Back in the shipyards, production sped up. The Ayers-class dreadnoughts were no longer prototypes. 10 were nearing completion. Each one carried enough firepower to level a small moon. But their true strength was in their minds. AI co-pilots trained on centuries of human warfare, from ancient naval battles to drone swarms in the Pacific Wars. These ships didn't just follow orders. They suggested better ones. Lisa Grant knew the calm wouldn't last. The Concordance would come in force next time. They'd bring their oldest warships, their heaviest guns, their most ruthless admirals. But humanity had one advantage the Empire could never understand. They weren't fighting for conquest or glory. They were fighting for home. And on every ship, in every cockpit, that made all the difference. The galaxy had assumed humans were late to the cosmic table. But while others built empires, humans had been quietly building something far more dangerous, a future they refused to lose. The Concordance could not let the humiliation stand. 2 encounters, 2 defeats. No casualties on the human side, not even a scratch. For an empire that prided itself on order, predictability, and absolute control, this was unacceptable. Fleet Admiral Vex Torin stood before the Imperial War Council and demanded full authorization for Operation Iron Maw, a full-scale invasion of the Sol system. He would not send scouts or patrols. He would send the fist of the Empire itself. 212 warships answered the call. Dreadnoughts with hulls thick enough to survive supernova shockwaves, carrier groups that launched swarms of hunter-killers, siege cruisers designed to crack planetary shields like eggshells. The fleet gathered at the edge of human-claimed space, a wall of metal and fire stretching across 3 light minutes. Torin stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Edict, and gave the order. Advance. Burn their world if you must, but bring me their shipyards. On Earth, the warning came early. Deep space sensors hidden in the Oort cloud picked up the energy bloom of the Concordance jump gates activating. Within minutes, every human military base went to full alert. Cities did not panic. Civilian networks had been trained for this moment through quiet drills disguised as emergency broadcasts. But in orbit, the real response began. Captain Maria Ellis stood on the command deck of the Ares Prime, the first of the new dreadnoughts to be fully operational. She was a former test pilot with a reputation for calm under fire and a habit of chewing mint gum during combat. Around her, crew members moved with quiet urgency. No shouting, no chaos, just focus. They had trained for this. Not just for months, but for years. "Confirm all ships are in position," she said. "Aye, Captain," came the reply from Lieutenant Ben Carter at comms. "All 37 vessels report ready. Lunar batteries standing by. Jupiter slingshot lanes clear." Humanity did not have 200 ships. They had 37. But they had something better, strategy born from desperation and creativity. While the Concordants believed in overwhelming force, humans believed in making every shot count. As the enemy fleet crossed the orbit of Neptune, the first human move began. Not with weapons, but with silence. Every Terran ship powered down non-essential systems. Engines went cold. Comms went dark. To Concordant sensors, the Sol system appeared empty, just a quiet star with a few dead satellites and an unremarkable blue planet. Turan frowned. "They cannot have fled. Their home is here." He ordered scout drones forward. Dozens of them shot ahead, scanning for heat, power, movement. They found nothing. But what they did not see were the human ships nestled in the shadow of Jupiter's moons, wrapped in thermal blankets that mimicked rock. They did not see the railgun platforms buried in the ice of Europa, their barrels aimed not at the fleet but at the empty space ahead of it. Then, as the Concordance vanguard passed the orbit of Saturn, the trap sprung. A single pulse, a low-frequency gravitic wave, rippled from a hidden emitter near Titan. It did no damage. But it disrupted the Concordance fleet's formation sync. For just 3 seconds, their ships drifted slightly out of alignment. That was all the humans needed. From the dark side of Ganymede, the Ares Prime fired. Not at the nearest ship, but at a point in space 50,000 kilometers ahead of the main column. The railgun slug, moving at 0.2 light speed, struck empty space and detonated a pre-placed kinetic mine. The explosion wasn't chemical. It was a burst of compressed space-time that warped local gravity. 2 Concordance destroyers, caught in the ripple, collided mid-turn. Their shields overloaded, hulls crumpled like paper. Before the fleet could react, more shots came. From asteroids, from lunar craters, from the rings of Saturn itself. Human ships didn't fight in lines. They fought like wolves, striking from hidden angles, then vanishing. The vanguard, piloted again by Kyle Brooks, used Jupiter's magnetic field to mask its engine signature, then launched a swarm of micro-drones that latched onto enemy comms arrays and fried them with feedback loops. Turan barked orders, trying to form a defensive sphere, but the human tactics made no sense. Ships appeared where they shouldn't. Weapons fired from directions that defied geometry. One cruiser reported being hit by a missile that seemed to come from inside its own hangar bay. Later analysis showed it had been a nano-disassembler launched hours earlier and hidden in a supply crate during a fake distress signal. The Concordance fleet began to fracture, command channels filled with static. Navigation systems glitched as human cyber warfare pulses mimicked cosmic background radiation. Entire squadrons lost coordination and drifted into each other's firing arcs. Maria Ellis watched the battle unfold on her holotable. "Now," she said. The Ares Prime surged forward, not toward the enemy but toward the sun. It skimmed the corona, using the star's gravity to whip around at impossible speed. As it reappeared near Mercury, it unleashed its main battery. Not energy beams, but adaptive plasma shells that learned shield frequencies mid-flight. 3 Concordance heavy cruisers lost shields in under 10 seconds. Then came the railguns. Then the boarding pods, filled not with soldiers, but with AI-guided repair bots that rewired enemy systems to shut them down. Admiral Turan stared at his main display as his flagship's port shields flickered and died. An invisible kinetic lance launched from a human stealth platform hidden in the asteroid belt had struck a support pylon. Alarms blared. Oxygen hissed from ruptured decks. For the first time in his life, Turan felt fear. He activated the emergency channel. "All ships retreat." Full withdrawal now. But it was too late for many. Human ships harried the retreat, picking off stragglers with surgical precision. The Odyssey, now repaired and upgraded, led a flotilla that disabled the fleet's jump gate relay, stranding dozens of vessels in system. By the time the last Concordance ship limped out of Sol space, over 60 of their vessels were destroyed or captured. Human losses: 0 ships, 3 drones, and 1 broken coffee machine on the Ayers Prime. Back on the bridge, Maria Ellis finally stopped chewing her gum. She looked at Earth on the view screen, blue, calm, unaware of how close it had come to fire from the stars. "Tell command," she said softly. We held. And across the fleet, humans knew something the Concordance was just beginning to understand. Their warships weren't just built. They were born from a species that refused to lose. After the failed invasion, the Galactic Concordance did not speak of defeat. Official reports called it a tactical reassessment, but in private, in the dim corridors of military academies and research labs, the truth spread like a quiet fire. Humans were not just strong. They were different. Their ships healed. Their weapons learned. Their pilots made decisions that no algorithm could predict. And worst of all, they did not follow the rules of war the galaxy had accepted for centuries. On Earth, there was no celebration. Relief, yes. Quiet pride, maybe. But everyone knew this was only the beginning. The Concordance would not vanish. They would study, adapt, and return, stronger, angrier, smarter. So humanity prepared not for peace, but for the next storm. At the Advanced Naval Projects Division in Nevada, Commander Lisa Grant walked through a long underground hall filled with humming servers and holographic schematics. Engineers like Daniel Ruiz worked around the clock, not just fixing battle damage, but improving it. Every shot fired in the Sol defense had been recorded, analyzed, and turned into data. A railgun barrel that overheated after the 12th shot, redesigned with liquid-cooled graphene lining. A shield frequency that lagged against plasma bursts, updated with real-time harmonic shifting. But the real secret wasn't in the hardware. It was in the way humans used it. While the Concordance trained officers to obey orders without question, human crews were taught to think for themselves. A junior sensor tech on the Vanguard had noticed a pattern in enemy comms static during the battle. Turns out it matched solar flare cycles. That tiny observation helped Kyle Brooks time his final strike perfectly. On a Concordance ship, that tech would have filed a report and waited for approval. On a human ship, he'd whispered it to Brooks over a private channel. And they acted in seconds. This was the human edge, chaos with purpose. Meanwhile, in orbit, Captain Maria Ellis oversaw repairs on the Ayers Prime. The ship had taken minor damage near the aft thrusters, but its nano-hull was already knitting itself back together. She watched as a team of young engineers, most still in their 20s, debated whether to reroute power through the secondary grid or boost the main capacitor. They argued, sketched ideas on handheld pads, and within an hour, had a solution better than the original design. Ellis smiled. That was the thing about humans. They didn't just build machines. They built teams, families, communities that turned fear into fuel. Back on the Concordance homeworld, unrest grew. Young officers questioned why their empire had failed against a species with one planet and no allies. Civilian scientists demanded access to human tech, not to copy it, but to understand it. Some even whispered that the Concordance had grown too rigid, too sure of its own greatness. In secret forums, they shared grainy footage of the Ayers Prime weaving through fire like a dancer, untouched. Admiral Toran, now stripped of his full command but kept as an advisor, sat alone in his quarters. He replayed the battle logs again and again. He saw how human ships used Jupiter not just as cover but as a weapon, how they turned silence into a trap, how they fought not to win but to survive. And in that he saw something his empire had forgotten. War was not just about power. It was about will. On Earth, that will was being tested in new ways. Not with guns, but with words. Ambassador Elena Ruiz, Daniel's older sister, was chosen to represent humanity in the first formal talks since the battle. The meeting place was Helios 9, a neutral space station halfway between Sol and Concordance territory. She arrived not in a warship, but in a small diplomatic shuttle painted white with a single blue stripe. No weapons, no escort. Just her, a datapad, and a message. The Concordance delegation was cold at first, tall, armored, speaking in clipped tones. They expected demands, threats, or gloating. Instead, Elena offered something unexpected: cooperation. "We don't want your empire," she said, standing calmly in the conference chamber. "We don't want your laws or your taxes. But we know there are dangers out there bigger than either of us. Rogue AIs, dead zones where ships vanish, ancient signals from the galactic core that no one understands. We can face them alone, or we can share what we know." She placed a data crystal on the table. It contained non-sensitive schematics of human shield harmonics, enough to show how they worked, not enough to build them. A gift, a test. The lead concordance diplomat, a senior counselor named Mira Voss, picked it up slowly. "Why help us after we attacked you?" Elena looked her in the eyes. "Because my people believe in second chances, and because we'd rather have you as a neighbor than an enemy." Silence filled the room. Then, for the first time, a concordance official nodded, not in command, but in respect. Back on Earth, news of the talks spread quietly. No headlines, no parades. Just a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, the galaxy didn't have to be a battlefield. In shipyards and labs, work continued. New pilots trained in simulators that recreated the chaos of the Sol defense. Engineers tested warp drives that could fold space with less energy. Even school children learned basic astrogation and signal coding, not for war, but for readiness. Because humans knew one truth better than anyone: peace was not the absence of enemies. It was the presence of strength, wisdom, and the courage to reach out a hand even after you'd been struck. And as the stars watched, two civilizations, one ancient, one young, began the slow, careful dance of trust. Not because they had to, but because they chose to. Months passed after the talks on Helios 9. The galaxy held its breath. Old enemies watched. Neutral systems waited to see which way the wind would blow. But in the quiet space between Sul and the Concordance border, something new began to grow. Not war, not peace, but partnership. The first joint patrol launched from a newly built station near the Orion Rift, a dangerous stretch of space littered with dead stars and drifting wreckage. On one side flew the Concordance corvette, steadfast, crewed by officers who still eyed humans with suspicion. On the other, the Terran destroyer Liberty, commanded by Captain Derek Lang, the same man who had faced the Concordance fleet alone in the early days. At first, the two ships kept their distance. Communications were formal. Maneuvers were mirrored but separate. But when a distress signal crackled over the shared channel, a freighter caught in a gravity snare near a collapsed neutron star, both crews moved without hesitation. Steadfast. Deployed grav stabilizers to hold the freighter steady, while the Liberty sent a rescue pod through the distortion field. It was risky. One wrong move and the pod would be shredded by tidal forces. But Lieutenant Nina Patel, piloting the pod, used a trick she'd learned in lunar canyons. She rode the gravity waves like ocean currents, dipping and rising with the pull. The Concordance sensor officer, watching her path on his display, muttered in awe, "She's not fighting the field. She's dancing with it." The rescue succeeded. The freighter crew, 3 insectoid traders from the Vexi Collective, were saved. That night, over shared rations in the Liberty's mess hall, the crews talked. Not about weapons or tactics, but about home. A Concordance engineer spoke of his daughter's first flight simulator lesson. Nina Patel showed them photos of her nephew's birthday on Mars Colony 3. Derek Lang and the Steadfast's commander, Joral Vex, a distant cousin of the disgraced Admiral Torin, sat in silence for a while, then played a simple card game using human decks. Slowly, walls fell. Back on Earth, children played with toy models of Ares-class ships, but now they also built Concordance cruisers out of clay. In schools, Galactic Standard was added to language classes. On Mars, engineers worked with Concordance scientists to design deep space hospitals that could serve both species. The exchange wasn't perfect. Misunderstandings happened. Old fears flared. But every time, someone chose patience over pride. Captain Maria Ellis, now promoted to fleet liaison, spent weeks aboard Concordance vessels, teaching their crews how human ships used predictive evasion, not as a trick but as a conversation with space itself. In return, she learned how the Concordance maintained fleet cohesion over light years using quantum-linked command nodes. She brought the idea back to Earth. and within a month human ships could coordinate even when comms were jammed. The real test came when new signals began appearing from the galactic core, not random noise patterns, pulses that repeated every 17.3 hours, growing stronger. Ancient records from dead civilizations called it the echo. Some believed it was a warning, others, a weapon waking up. Both Earth and Varelli's Prime agreed. They would investigate together. A joint science vessel, the Horizon Seeker, was built in record time, half human, half concordance design. Its hull blended nanoweave with crystalline armor. Its engines used both microwarp and gravitic slipstream. At its helm stood Commander Lisa Grant and senior scientist Mira Voss, the same diplomat who had accepted Elena Ruiz's data crystal months before. As the Horizon Seeker approached the core, strange things happened. Time slowed in patches. Stars blinked out and reappeared in new places. The ship's AI began speaking in riddles. But the human Concordance crew held firm. When the navigation system failed, a young Concordance cadet used star charts from human archives to plot a safe course. When the life support glitched, Daniel Ruiz jury-rigged a filter using Concordance biogel and Terran algae. They never found the source of the echo. But they learned it wasn't hostile, just old. Older than either civilization, a remnant of a time when the galaxy was younger, wilder, and full of builders who left behind puzzles, not weapons. Returning home, the crew of the Horizon Seeker carried more than data. They carried trust. On Earth, people looked up at the night sky differently now. The stars weren't just distant lights. They were neighbors, potential friends, maybe even allies against whatever else waited in the dark. The Concordance stopped calling humans primitives. Earth stopped calling the Empire tyrants. New words emerged: partners, watchers, keepers of the balance. And in quiet moments when no one was watching, even old warriors like Admiral Turan would gaze at a small holoscreen in his study, replaying footage of the Ares Prime weaving through fire. He no longer saw a threat. He saw proof that the galaxy still held wonder. Humanity had not conquered the stars. They had joined them, not with force but with courage, not with fear, but with open hands. And as new ships, human Concordance, and soon others began patrolling the outer dark together, one truth became clear to all who sailed among them. The age of human insignificance was over. The age of human legend had just begun.